Hello. Hello. Intro. Hello, am I audible? Good evening. It gives me immense pleasure to extend to you all my warm greetings on behalf of the Society of Naval Architecture Students. The Society of Naval Architecture Students is a body of the Department of Ship Technology responsible for nurturing the young naval architects by organizing various events like this. Now it is my honor to invite Mr. Jarvis Johnson, the Director, Naval Architecture and Marine Engineering at S&P Global, to lead us to the webinar on the topic, how shipping.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, super. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Society of Naval Architecture Students, India, for this opportunity to discuss about the decarbonization aspect of our industry, to the upcoming leaders who are gonna drive this industry towards the greener shipping by 2050. Let me try to share my screen. Am I a host now? Okay, thank you. Let me try to share my screen. Let me know when you all can able to see my screen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it visible now? Can I get yes from any one of you?
Visible.
Okay, super. Thank you for the confirmation. So without any further delays, let's get into the topic of how to decarbonize shipping. Transparency is the key. So we are in the phase of getting our oceans greener. Yeah, so I would like to play this video so that I can able to set the proper stage in terms of the topic what we're going to discuss today.
Good evening-ish, ladies and gentlemen. The ship has reached the shore.
This is just few days back when the UN members has reached this UN High Sea Treaty. So I think most of you would have heard of this treaty, which has just been signed, I think last Saturday, where this treaty of this treaty of protecting this international waters, which was in discussion from last 2 decades, and finally it has reached a conclusion in terms of protecting the international waters almost 30%. So currently it's only 1. And now after this treaty, I think it's passed and the framework will be set in terms of this MPAs, maritime protected areas. So when it reaches, it's more or less this 30% of this international oceans will be protected. So what does that mean? It means there will be control to everything in terms of restrictions, how much you can fish, or how much there will be a control in terms of the shipping trade lanes. So currently you might have heard of the trade lanes. There is no restrictions as such, and also there is no actual restrictions in terms of Can participants mute yourself? Just for again reconfirmation, am I audible? I just heard some disturbances. So...
Yeah, audible.
Okay. Let me try to share my screen again so that I can continue. Okay. Yeah, so it is quite welcoming in terms of looking at these emotional moments when this treaty has been agreed. That is, of course, a reason to waiting for 2 decades and to just get this signed and approved. The whole committee were actually in the meeting room for almost 2 days. So that's a great thing. With that said, let me introduce myself. So I'll be the today's presenter. A few wordings about me. Raised in a family with a background in shipping. Of course, my uncle worked in Shipping Corporation of India as a captain. That's the point where I came to know about ships and the field of maritime, where all we can explore. And I had a passion for ships from my childhood. So completed my bachelor's in naval architecture and offshore engineering from Academy of Maritime Education and Training. And later I completed my certification in data analytics from IIM Rohtak. I'm a naval architect with more than a decade of experience in mostly on the maritime techno-commercial environment, which means, of course, initially I started my career with shipyards and design office, also worked within India, and also explored the opportunities in Dubai and Colombia, working for shipyards and design offices over there for 3+ years, and later joined Maersk. So that's where I spent most of my time in my career. So almost 7 years, taking over a position as a vessel performance and naval architect, and ending up my role as working as a manager, heading the naval architecture and underwater services team. So the team which actually manages the vessel performance data and looking into the actual actions when it comes to hull performance. And currently, as you all know, I'm working as a director of naval architecture and marine engineering with S&P Global. As you all, there is no introduction required for S&P Global, but I'll be giving a bit of an introduction in terms of what S&P Global does on the maritime space. Will be something, would be an interest in terms of it will be a discovery phase you guys also to understand what we are exactly doing. So I'm a maritime decarbonization expert, trying to learn and grow and try to create the sustainable advantage to decarbonize our oceans. I will give you my contacts in the end of this presentation so that anyone can reach me any point in time when you need any further clarification or guidance in terms of what's happening in this industry. So a bit of a copyright, since I'm coming from a data industry. So this is a sort of a mandatory thing to project, but you can skip for now. Since I think the most of the participants here are students, not a fun fact here, but it will be good to highlight a bit about the post-pandemic world in terms of naval architects. Of course, this is a survey, last year's survey in the end of last year. A consulting firm called Faststream has carried out this survey with all the working naval architect professionals all over the world, from the early movers to the senior and the management people. So As we all know, during the pandemic time, it's all went into a state of work from home. Currently, as you see here, 70% of naval architects want to work in a hybrid style, and that is all set with what is happening in current world. So most of the companies right now coming up with a hybrid style of work in office and work in home. 70, yeah, it's in a great sort of flexibility. So that's a quite welcoming and a sort of a differentiation which is happening in the industry right now when it comes to the post-pandemic world in our industry, which is not different to the other industries. So I think it's just here to communicate and say that it's same in naval architects world. So let me introduce my organization's maritime capabilities. So our history starts from running the IMO numbering scheme on behalf of IMO. So if I put up in a very layman terms, if you have a ship, you want to get it registered and get an IMO number. So we will be the one who will be providing this IMO number to any ship owners in the world on behalf of IMO. So we run this IMO scheme. So that's how our history starts. So we are the world's largest ship characteristics database. And also we are the world's largest maritime AIS data provider. We have collected data from almost 2 satellite data providers, and we also have our own antennas spread across this globe. And also we have fitted our antennas on board ships, which also means that our antennas are again moving to capture these AIS signals around the world. We also have our own image database, world ships image database, and also we have all the world shipping company related information and port information. Port information can go to the level of the actual port facilities and the other aspects in terms of the capabilities of the ports, etc. Just to highlight, one of the classic examples could be shore to power supply for ships. So for the cold ironing process, so these sort of data can be actually get from our global maritime database, which we have provided. So we are also a company who actually classifies the standardization for any ships built in this world in terms of ship type and size classification. So you might be aware of this stat code 5, which is the global recognized classification in terms of, let's say, general cargo ship. There could be a different level of general cargo ships like deck cargo ship or a heavy load carriers, or even for that matter, you could see a open hatch cargo ships, which was actually a classic example when there was, I think last year, when we had this challenges in terms of getting the container ships with the booming market. These ships have actually been able to convert into container ships to carry the containers on board on top of their open decks. So that's one of the classic example. So we are here as an expert, also create advantage to the industry so that we can able to drive the industry in the right direction with all the global players who is actually navigating this industry in the right phase of decarbonization. So world is getting older, which means 57% of global fleet is greater than 15 years old. A bit of a stats here. Of course, you could also see the top 10 ships by ship type, where you could see general cargo stands out in terms of number of ships. On the other side, bulk carrier stands out in terms of deadweight capacity. So overall, this gives a good picture in terms of what quantum we are talking about when it comes to global fleet. So by ship's age, as I mentioned, so more than 50% of our fleet is more than greater than 15 years old. And you could see how the rest of the ships are placed under different age groups. Since here we are dealing with a lot of naval architects, it's also good to speak about the region of build of the world fleet. So looking at this atlas, we could clearly understand how the shipping is actually siloed in terms, shipbuilding is siloed in terms of the capabilities. So mostly you could see China and South Korea are playing the key role in terms of shipbuilding. Well, all that said, shipping, greenhouse gas emissions, and key historic actions so far will be good to revisit. What's actually greenhouse gas emission and other relevant substances means. We talk about CO2 emissions these days. Of course, by the end of the day, we all should know what the greenhouse gas emissions are. And as the fancy statement says, 2% of CO2 emissions and 3% of greenhouse gas emissions is what the shipping contributes to the global emissions. So when we talk about greenhouse gas emissions, of course, the main greenhouse gas emissions, the six gases are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and HFCs and PFCs, and the sulfur hexafluoride. So when that said, IMO started their journey looking at the other relevant substances, which is the indirect contributors of supporters of greenhouse gas, which includes NOx, SOx, and particulate matters and other oxides. So, of course, when you look at NOx can also directly able to support and reduce the nitrous oxide for that sake. So these relevant substances are again an indirect contributor to the greenhouse gas emissions. So a bit of a stats again here. So when you look at all the greenhouse gases, some greenhouse gases stands out in millions. So you could easily visualize here the CO2, which stands out in million, SOx, which stands out in millions, NOx, which stands out in millions. So millions are the ones which actually need direct attention in terms of reducing it. So when that's said, let's look back into the key actions. What has happened so far in the industry is the NOx emission reduction from the engines. Of course, we have seen this tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 engines, which is coming on the technical aspects and the later methods used to reduce the NOx using this exhaust gas recirculation or selective catalytic methods or anything it could be. So this process is again part of being a tier 3 requirement. So from 2016, 1st of Jan, any vessel which is built under tier 3 should have a NOx emission lesser than 3.4 grams per kilowatt hour. So that is the requirement. Of course, we also talk about slow speed engines, medium speed engine, and high speed engine. On the high speed engine side, it's 2 grams of NOx per kilowatt hour. So that's the regulation. IMO 2020 sulfur limits on the SOx side. Of course, all the ships size that are required to meet on the global waters is 0.5 sulfur. That is a sulfur capping. So this is, I think, the key time everyone were actually quite closely following up with industry in terms of who is trying to adapt scrubbers, who is trying to go with the compliant fuel like with very low sulfur fuel oil. So I think sorry for that interruption. I think there was someone who actually has unmuted. No problem. It will be great if you guys can able to keep yourself muted so that we won't get any further disturbances. Thank you. So when we look at the ECA zones, which has been designated areas, so it is environmental protection zones where the SOx emission reduction limits has been now set to 0.1 on this emission control areas. So you could see the timeline in terms of when this has been implemented. From 2020, as I mentioned, 0.5, and from 2015, you could see on the ECA areas, this is 0.1. So when I say that a vessel in this world can't burn HFO until unless they have been fitted with any one type of scrubber, open loop or closed loop scrubber. Of course, with all the known restrictions, if they still would like to burn HFO, they should have scrubbers. If they are not fitted with scrubbers, then the preferred fuel is VLSFO. Who is responsible for accounting and reporting a ship's emission? So I think this is a key aspect when we want our industry to get decarbonized. Who owns the responsibility? I think we might think that we are in a complex structural setup when we look at our value chain. So maybe just a bit of an introduction into our shipping value chain. From the shippers to consignee, you could see who all involved in terms of moving this cargo from point A to point B, and who owns the final responsibility in terms of managing the emissions. So this is a classic liner trade supply chain, value chain. So when you look at it, you will understand how many parties are actually involved in terms of delivering the cargo. So to make it more familiar, maybe I would like to touch up this specific shipping value chain, which covers closely into a techno-commercial environment, also involving multiple known parties in the shipping naval architecture world. So a ship is owned by a ship owner. Of course, it could be managed by a different technical manager and could be operated by a different commercial manager. And of course, it could be moving a cargo of a different cargo owner. So when all this said, the key stakeholders in shipping, when you look at it, everyone might need the emissions, what the vessels are doing, but who is actually responsible for that specific emission which the vessel is emitting at that point in time on that voyage? So the answer is not pretty simple, but still it is simple. So when I said that, before getting into the details of emission scopes, you could also see on the outer ring, which are the other parties like banks, financial institutions, insurers, shipyards, ports. These are the people who comes under the outer ring of the supply value chain. So everyone is responsible. I think there is always a need of an equal responsibility when it comes to the journey of decarbonization, but someone who owns the core responsibility so that they can navigate the decarbonization. So what is emission scope? So it's core important to understand what is emission scope in order to understand who is responsible for what. So we all know emission scopes are categorized into scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, and in some countries it also, like, there is other case. So in reality, so in shipping, when you look at it, we are mostly responsible for scope 1 and scope 3 emissions. Scope 1 are direct emission, scope 3 is again an indirect emission, which is whole and soul sort of navigating within the value chain of shipping. Okay, so who is responsible for accounting and reporting of ship emission? So ship owner or charterer? The question is pretty simple. So whether the emissions accounting should be in the hands of ship owner or it should be in the hands of charterer when it comes to both accounting and reporting. So as I mentioned, for shipping, the guiding principle for greenhouse gas emission accounting and reporting should be the one who is actually paying for the fuel. So when I say that who is actually paying for the fuel is the one who will be actually burning the fuel and emitting. So that comes under the scope 1. So I would like to just explain a bit about who is voyage charter, what is voyage charter, and what is time charter, so that you could be able to understand the complete different aspect of how the ships are being operated. So let's take an example. Let's say I own a car. I wanted to make some commercial benefit of owning a car because I had to have this car as an asset. I wanted to earn money through this car. So my first job is to find a customer who can actually able to support me commercially, which means, of course, I will get a hire in terms of getting the passenger delivered from one place to another. So if I'm operating this car myself and trying to find customer myself and move that passenger from one place to another, that is nothing but called as spot or a voyage charter. On the spot, you're trying to find a passenger yourself and trying to move the passenger from the start destination to the end destination. That is nothing but the voyage charter. When it comes to time charter, of course, I own a car. One specific company needs a car so that they would like to move their own customers or passengers. Let's say an organization needs a car they wanted to maybe they wanted to deploy this car to move their employees. So for that, I might give my car to the specific organization in a hire for that specific period, let's say 1 year. So that organization who has hired my car gonna take the complete responsibility in terms of commercially operating that car. So here that's called as time charter. And of course, there are different aspects in terms of pool, which is again closer to how this Uber and Ola model works. So which you might be aware. So here in voyage charter, the responsibility of accounting and reporting of scope 1 emission, again, it lies with ship owner. On time charter, the scope 1 emission responsibility lies with time charter, the charter who is actually hired the vessel. And on the single trip time charter, just hiring the ship for one specific trip with a charter party clause. So again, in this case, the responsibility of scope 1 emission will lies with charterer. And on the bareboat charterer side, where a charterer takes the complete responsibility of technically and commercially managing the vessel. So here, the actual owner who is charterer owns the responsibility of scope 1 emissions. So when we have a bit of a complex cases like chain of charters, okay, I own a ship, I gave my vessel on a time charter to a charterer 1, and that charterer 1 again gives that vessel on a time charter to another party, charterer 2. So in this case, who owns the responsibility? Of course, the charterer 2 owns the responsibility of scope 1 emissions, but with the guiding principle on the scope 3 emission side, anyone who is involved in this value chain can be able to report them on the scope 3. On scope 1, we shouldn't have any duplication, but on scope 3, which is an optional thing, it's always encouraged to report their value chain emissions. So scope, when we want to touch upon the scope 3 emissions, in the future fuel aspect standpoint, when it comes on the LCA side, life cycle assessment. So we all procure fuel, but how much actually the emissions are when the fuel is being produced and transported to the ship. So that also will cover under scope 3. So for the future scenarios of getting into this transition for pathway for the alternate fuel, it is quite important and relevant to know which scope it falls under. How far is shipping industry in decarbonization efforts? It's quite a classic question these days everyone asks. The answer starts from addressing the climate change by IMO. Of course, it is a decade of action to cut greenhouse gas emission in shipping is something which we all know, but it all started from taking the resolution in reducing the CO2 greenhouse gas emissions from 1997. And in 2003, again, the resolution has been reinitiated on the greenhouse gas emission standpoint. And in 2013, the EEDI and the SIM has been implemented. And as we go across the timeline in terms of what all the key events happen from EEDI and the greenhouse gas study, first, second, third, and fourth, and now the new study gonna come up in this year. And this year, of course, as we all know, we got this EXI and CII in place on the CO2 emission reduction strategy standpoint. So by 2050, the shipping needs to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 50%. And on the long-term strategy standpoint, from 2020 to 2050, there is also ambitions to at least reduce the greenhouse gas emission by 70%, carbon emissions by 70%. So that's all states how our zero carbon shipping strategy follows as per IMO. So one key thing which I can highlight here is the data collection standpoint. If you wanted to take any action, we need to measure. So the key action happened in 2016, where this IMO data collection system was kept in place, designed and kept in place, which means the ships greater than 5,000 gross tonnage should mandatorily report the fuel consumption data to IMO, so that IMO can be able to measure and understand what's going on in terms of the emission standpoint on the global shipping fleet. Let's look at IMO trajectory. I'll also talk a bit about vessel specific current trajectory examples. As I mentioned, from 2012 as a baseline, we could see the reduction path leading towards 70% reduction in emissions. So starting from 2012, around 15.5, 16 grams of CO2 per ton nautical mile, towards getting into 3.6 grams of CO2 per ton nautical mile. That is the reduction aspect which we are talking. You might have seen the traditional IMO trajectories, which might be looking a bit complex in real world. Just put up this from the greenhouse gas study sources and SEC sources so that it can be clearly understandable. So ship specific trajectory. So just looking at current year's trajectory, let's talk about bulk carrier, for example. So when you look at this trajectory, you could see how the CO2 reduction, the intensities are reducing when the ships sizes are increasing. So on the smaller ship size, this clearly shows the inefficiencies, even though the smaller ships emits less CO2 and bigger ships emit more CO2. But when it comes to per cargo per ton nautical mile, so in this case, you could understand a bit of an inefficiencies in terms of what's happening on the smaller segments. So the question again is, how much actually do we emit? So we all need to measure in order to reduce. So the answer is the IMO DCS, which I spoke. So IMO DCS data showcases almost 212 million tons of fuel was used in 2021, which relates to 660 million of tons of CO2 emissions. So what sort of fuels are actually being used so far till 2021? You could see still we are in the fossil fuel consumption phase, which is known, and only 0.11% we are in the phase of future fuel aspects in 2021. So when you look at it on the 0.11% on the other fuel category, you could see ethane is taking the space, max space, and biofuel. And you could see LPGs, both butane and propane, and methanol and ethanol as it's taking its own stage. So we could also clearly see what's the state of what in terms of this transition and future fuel standpoint. When we segregate this 660 million tons of CO2 emissions, which has been reported on 2021. So the top emitters are container ships, bulk carriers, and tankers. So they are the one who pollutes a lot, and it also keeps on increasing compared to last year. Again, we could see a clear increase in emissions especially for bulk carriers and container ships. And for tankers, there is a slight reduction. That's again with regards to the market scenario, what has actually happened. So further looking down into, okay, on the international aspect, we have seen on the IMO DCS how these numbers are looking. But when it comes to European Union, of course, European Union, they are also reporting their CO2 emissions. All the vessels calling European port, either from or to or within European ports, they are mandatory to report their emissions into UMRV. So as per UMRV, we could see 2021, 125.5 million tons of CO2, which EU in itself accounts, and which relates to 40.3 million tons of fuel. And interesting fact about our Indian flag ships. So Indian flag registered ships, as per DG Shipping, it's 4.62 million tons of CO2, which accounts to 1.47 million tons of fuel. So this is the stats as per 2020. We had to receive this 2021 report. So on a high level comparison, world fleet IMO DCS data versus EU MRB TETRIS data. So fuel or CO2 overview, if you look at it, you would also see the annual time spent. So what sort of quantum we are talking when we talk about European Union MRV system, what sort of data it captures. So we could easily able to understand what's the actual difference, how far it is between the global fleet versus EU. Okay, let's break down this emissions in terms of machinery and operational standpoint. Yeah, I have captured these two images from the reference document which I've highlighted on the greenhouse gas strategy 4. So we could clearly understand, we all know that the consumption, max consumption, it comes from main engine, but on the operational standpoint, when it comes to the cargo related consumptions, we could also clearly see on the oil tanker how the boiler consumption and auxiliary consumptions are playing a key role. Same goes for container ships on the auxiliary engine side, looking at the reefers and its load, how the AE consumptions are increasing. And yeah, so this gives a picture in terms of what sort of quantum we are talking about in terms of different machineries. And same goes for what sort of quantum we are talking in terms of operational aspects, in terms of how the ships both on sailing and port situations. So bulk carriers, you could see at berth consumptions are the least, and how the slow transit and normal cruisings consumptions are taking in their own positions. So overall, if you look at any tankers, in reality, of course, they have a 50-50 voyage profile, which means 50% in sea and 50% in port. That's in a classic scenario anyone can easily observe on classic oil tankers. So further drilling down into the actual sea and port consumption drill down, at sea consumptions, we can bifurcate further into pure sailing and cargo related consumption. On pure sailing, to operate the day-to-day operations in terms of the main propulsion on the main engine consumption standpoint, and on a hotel load standpoint, to provide the hotel load supply, of course, the auxiliary engine consumption and boiler consumption in terms of steam for the day-to-day operations. So we could all understand how the pure sailing consumption looks from where it is coming. And on the cargo related consumption side, if you're going to take classic tanker ships for a cargo heating, of course, they might be ending up with burning more fuel. And for reefer load on the containers, again, you might be ending up with burning more fuel. And same goes for inerting on tankers for producing inert gas. And similarly, for different types of ship, there could be a different aspect of cargo related consumptions coming in place. Same at port. Maybe I'll take an example of cargo related consumption on port on tank cleaning side or discharging side. So on the tanker vessels, you might end up in higher consumptions due to loading and unloading operations. So far we have seen where we stand, but the real question for this session is, how do we get our industry to decarbonized? So decarbonization, I think this is a classic discussion when we look at the industry from last 2 years. Everyone gets up into the stage in terms of discussing about how to decarbonize our industry. But it all starts from IMO strategy from 2018, where IMO clearly spoke about short-term, mid-term, and long-term. So on the short-term aspect, of course, technical and operational measures, adoption of energy efficiency practices, and the mid-term wise implementation, of course, in terms of market-based measures, it could be like usage of this intermediate fuel, the transition fuel like LNG, LPGs, and in long-term measures, getting into the zero carbon fuel strategy. So these are again like quite well-defined in terms of navigating this industry on the short-term standpoint and in mid-term standpoint and in long-term standpoint to reach the end goal by 2050 and phase out completely in the later stage. How to reduce CO2 emissions? So we can reduce CO2 emissions both on technical and operational standpoint, as we are aware, 57% of the global fleets are still the older tonnage, which means there is a immense opportunities in terms of getting these vessels technically fit and operationally efficient to operate. So technically, of course, we all heard of the guidance in terms of getting this EEXI in place for any ships, existing ships. So for that, the classic scenario is the engine power limitation, EPL. And that's how, in order to comply to the targets trajectories of EEXI, the simplest option is the reduced speed, of course, getting into the EPL, engine power limitation, and make the vessel fit to operate. And on the operational side, of course, CII is a guiding principle, but when we look at the actual CII, in reality, of course, there is a lot of debate happening in terms of without having the cargo quantity in place with the AER as a measure. So how this can lead into inaccuracies. But in reality, I believe this is a start. And as the industry moves on, IMO will come up in terms of covering up all this existing gaps, known gaps in these frameworks. So this is maybe this specific graphical representation you might have seen it represented in different ways, but this clearly shows the scope of each and every actions can contribute to the emissions reduction. So maybe a classic example on auxiliary system 1 to 4, it's more of a matter of a behavioral change or getting into the technical aspects of moving away from bigger pumps to a smaller pumps as per the demand on board, or it could be on the operational side more of how the behavior of a ship staff can impact the consumptions. So I keep on when I keep on speaking about this, I also remember during my childhood, my parents used to always say, when you are not in the room, try to turn off the fan and the lights so that we can able to save the power. So this is a exact traditional scenarios which we are talking on board ship, how the behavior of ship staff can actually influence and try to reap from the low hanging fruits. So either it could be a steam trap or it could be an excess power due to operational of any of the pumps which are not required to be operated. On the technique, looking at one of the classic example, of course, I can't speak about everything which is represented over here, but I will pick one from a technical standpoint and one from operational standpoint. On the technical standpoint, of course, technical improvement, Maersk Pelican, since during this period, I was working for Maersk Tankers, so I think it's a well-known thing for me. So that's why I just wanted to bring in this specific device into our discussion. So Flettner rotors, which is known for the utilization of Magnus effects into getting this additional power to decarbonize shipping. So this is nothing but the rotor sail, which can actually deliver a forward thrust, which will enable the engine to be throttled back. So that this technology is not something new. We all know this technology exists from 1926. From boats, later it's been also implemented and installed in some of the bigger ships, windmill carrying ships, and now it again got the center stage in terms of this decarbonization aspect, where we could easily see the recent study from IMO clearly says 3 to 15% on the main engine fuel consumption reduction it can make, depends upon the ship size. On Maersk Pelican, the actual savings is 8.2. That is the savings which has been captured basis the trials which has been conducted. And this 8.2%, again, it can vary between 7 to 10% of fuel savings. It all depends upon from which direction the wind is flowing, favorable winds. Otherwise, this can also go low or higher, depends upon the wind conditions. On the operational improvement standpoint, hull fouling is a major challenge. So what's the quantum of impact of hull fouling into the greenhouse gas emission is huge, more than what we think. So biofouling increases hull roughness. Hull roughness increases the fuel consumption. Of course, fuel consumption increases the greenhouse gas emissions. So when you look at the fouling impacts on greenhouse gas emission, biofouling condition versus increase in fuel consumption. So this is a great representation, which I took it from glow fouling IMO report. So here you could see a ship can end up in terms of emitting 55% more CO2 when the ship is covered with barnacles of 5 mm, only with 1% coverage. So we could really understand what's the state of art when it comes to hull fouling and how it actually influences the greenhouse gas emissions. So on the right hand side, you could see the biofouling processes. Of course, this is a classic biofouling processes, but you might end up a ship which is just coming out of water, dry dock, and it's just in water for a few days or few weeks, and you end up in getting barnacles attached to it. So any abnormal situations like this also can happen in reality, but to put it in numbers, a small slime layer can actually increase up to 25% in greenhouse gas emissions. So think about the fouling condition, extensive fouling condition, and how much it can impact. So when I say that, of course, this is the business case which happened with this glow fouling partnership, where you could see, taking example of a ship bulk carrier trading on an equatorial region, where you could see cleaning scenario with no cleaning scenario. So with a proactive cleaning, which is in yellow, we could clearly understand how the ship's consumptions we could able to maintain below 20%. So the power increase due to fouling can be easily covered up if we do a proper proactive cleaning, both propeller cleaning and propeller polishing and hull cleaning. So few of the numbers in terms of the CO2 standpoint, we could see a vessel, if it is always clean, sorry for the inconvenience. I think you guys can't able to see my screen anymore. Am I right? Let me know if you guys can see my screen now.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So if a vessel remains always clean, and if you could see a scenario where no cleaning happens, you could see there is 100% in the last year in terms of power increase. So we all could easily able to understand the quantum of cleaning and what sort of fuel cost savings we can make, or CO2 emission reductions we can make is clearly mentioned here. This 23,000 and 35,000 metric tons of CO2 we can reduce in reality with a proactive cleaning, and with a reactive cleaning we can save a little bit lesser, because it's more of finding out the vessel is fouled and you are not getting the opportunity to clean it. In this case, if you look at this yellow line, of course, the vessel has already reached the 20% power increase in the first year, start of the first year, but it took almost 6 months to get the vessel cleaned. So this is a sort of a reactive cleaning. It's again related to the availability of ships and availability and the other constraints in terms of whether the port allows a cleaning and all other aspects. And it's also a matter of debate saying that is it good enough to clean the vessel which is just out of dry dock? It's just been a year. So all these considerations can come in. Let's not delay. Let's get into the future fuel standpoint. So future fuel is a sort of a key. It's more or less 64% of the total CO2 reduction strategy as per IMO by 2050. So 64% of CO2 emission can be easily reduced moving into future fuel. So the next step in shipping methodology is to include this LCA, which is currently under discussion in MEPCs. So in upcoming MEPCs, you will find a proper guidance in terms of calculating this LCA assessment for different fuel types. So there are well-known frameworks like GLEC and GREET models, where you could able to see the actual numbers for the well to tank, so that you could able to easily calculate the complete well to wake emissions or well to propeller emissions, as you could see here. So well to tank, it all includes the emissions due to extraction, transportation, processing, storage, and bunkering. And tank to wake or tank to propeller, which includes storage on board the ship and the combustion of that specific fuel on board the ship. So currently, only the emission scope which is covered under the IMO greenhouse gas strategy is tank to wake or tank to propeller. What does transition and future fuel can do? So reduction possibilities is something which we can look at when it comes to future fuel compared to the fossil fuel, the current fuel standpoint. So on the right hand side, you could see CO2 reduction compared to HFO. So a diesel oil can easily able to save up to 3% when it comes to tank to wake. But when you look at the holistic view of looking the well to wake approach of LCA, then you end up in increase of 8.4% in terms of emissions. So future fuels, methanol in itself, it's not a actual future fuel. It could be a transition fuel, looking at minus 10.8% reduction in terms of CO2 when it compares with HFO. But when it comes to e-methanol or biomethanol, all blue, green, gray, so these can actually make wonders when we include the complete well to tank, well to wake in place. So you could see minus 100% reduction. It could be not as close as 100%, but yeah, it's more or less closer to 100. Same goes for ammonia, where of course there is no discussion of CO2 there, but on the ethanol side you could see. And one interesting fact on LPG, so where you could compare easily, can able to compare with LNG and understand, yeah, 25% reduction compared to HFO on LNG, where it is 15 to 16% when it comes to LPG on the tank to wake. But when you want to look at the complete well to wake aspect, you could see LPG is taking the stage slightly higher compared to LNG. So reduction possibilities both on cost and greenhouse gas footprint. We could see the matrix in terms of low and high. So LNG fuel cost low, greenhouse gas footprint, of course, reduction possibility is high. Same goes for methanol, where the reduction possibility is not higher when it is compared to a normal methanol compared to e-methanol. Of course, you can easily able to reduce. So you could able to understand what actually matters when it comes to burning different set of fuel, both on cost and greenhouse gas footprint standpoint. So when IMO 2020 has happened, everyone has mostly calculated their business case basis the fuel price. We say it as spread. So looking at a spread between HFO and VLSFO of 200 USD per ton is something which everyone has trusted on, with returns of investment within 6 months of operations. But fuel cost actually varied. It has increased, it has decreased, the spread has increased and decreased. Last year, it came closer to $70 to $80 as a spread, the cost difference between VLSFO and HFO. And last year, it again reached closer to 170 to 200 USD per ton, which is a great business case. That is a point where you could see a real gain in terms of getting this scrubbers in place. Of course, it's not the great thing to do when we look at the pollution in a sort of a high level. polluting waters. Even I heard people saying that it's negligible, but still we are polluting. So many ports are actually banned open loop scrubbers. So these discussions in terms of whether to have scrubber, yes or no, in terms of transiting towards a greener fuel is again a decision which each and every company can decide as per their strategy. So far, we have seen till how we can decarbonize shipping. Of course, nothing might be new, but it's a sort of a reaffirmation in terms of what has happened in the industry so far. But I would like to take this discussion further into the looking at the global frameworks to support this transition. So how the actual global frameworks in this world, existing in this world, actually supporting this energy transition. So current energy frameworks or emission frameworks I have classified to show high-level insights in terms of what IMO is doing, what EU is doing, what Global Maritime Forum is doing, or Smart Freight Center is doing, what others are doing. Each and every region or country or even like organization bringing up their own indexes or reportings to measure what's happening on the emission standpoint is quite evident looking at all these frameworks. So every framework which is existing other than IMO is more or less a regional based or an independent framework to navigate the other stakeholders towards IMO greenhouse gas strategy, which will again lead to the Paris Agreement of minus 2.4 degrees Celsius. IMO side on the right, on the left, and UMRV, on the European Union side, on the right hand side, we could clearly see how both are getting aligned. I'm not going to talk about the ones which has already been implemented till CII. Of course, from this year, you could see EXI and CII already in place. But in future, in coming years, you could gonna see this greenhouse gas fuel standards where you will find this well-to-wake emission calculation opportunities, scopes. And on the CO2 price side, market-based measure to set a price for set a price for CO2 emissions so that the emissions can be easily traded. So this emission trading system on the EU side, EU ETS, it has been implemented wide across different industries, but on shipping, it has already been agreed and it will come to the picture from 2024. So basis this emission trading scheme, of course, there will be a price which will be set for each and every emissions, CO2 emissions, which a ship gonna make. And that can be easily traded with the fuel price set, with the price set. So in 2025 on the EU side, we will also get this fuel EU, which is again the same well-to-wake calculation, but on the EU standpoint. CII, I think it's a well-known definition. Everyone knows carbon intensity index. So this formula in itself, it's clearly defined in terms of CO2, grams of CO2 divided by the capacity into the distance traveled by the vessel. But how it has evolved, including the voyage adjustment and correction factors, which is actually required to improve this assessment further, is something which industry has just decided and evolved last year. So you could all see and read what are the voyage adjustments and correction factors which has been implemented so far. When I say that, still there are gaps in terms of corrections for adverse weathers has not been implemented. Of course, there are news which says as we move on, the weather conditions goes worse and worse, which is not accounted so far. And extensive port stay and waiting time. And when it comes to LNG ships, boil-off gas consumptions, all these correction aspects are not being incorporated yet, which will be looked at again in later stage in 2025, I believe. On other global framework standpoint, the Global Maritime Forum, so they have come up with a framework to bring all the charters trying to align them in terms of IMO greenhouse gas strategy. So right now we have 25 signatories in Sea Cargo Charter, which they represent almost 15% of the global bulk cargo transported by sea in 2021. So the simple score here, it shows like they are misaligned 2.7% when it comes to IMO trajectory. But when you're going to look at further, because the simple averages are not completely relevant, because we all need a sort of a weighted average, which can't be done in terms of the data sets what we have right now, they're collecting right now on the Sea Cargo Charter standpoint. So bulk carriers, they are like 5.3% misaligned. Chemical tankers, where we could see a max percentage of 40% misaligned, that also comes with the targets which has been set by IMO, is not the exactly what they are seeing in the real world. So it's quite off. I think IMO will come up in terms of aligning these trajectories. But on the SCC side, there is already a discussion in terms of getting this chemical tankers trajectories changed to align with the current industry standpoint. Only in oil tankers, you could see it's well aligned, even it is like 11% more aligned in terms of the emissions. So Poseidon Principle, again, it's a framework by GMF. It's for banks and financial institutions. So this is again showcasing where the commitment of banks are in terms of CO2 emission reductions. So this year you could see the declared report, this annual disclosure report revealed average climate alignment of 9.68%. So almost 10% misaligned in an average. And compared to last year, this is the second year they are reporting, compared to last year, there is a 25% decline in alignment. So it's getting worse. And yeah, only 25% of the actual banks are actually aligned with the IMO targets. On the Poseidon Principle for marine insurers side, this is again the framework from GMF again to align all the marine insurers. So this is the first ever report which has been published last year. So where we could see it's 12.7% misaligned when we compare to the 50% reduction strategy. Why we are specifically saying is 50% reduction strategy? Only in this case, they are also tracking both on 50% reduction strategy and 100% reduction strategy. So overall, we know how different stakeholders in industry are trying to commit to what IMO is navigating, and also clearly gives us a state of art in terms of where they stand when it comes to IMO trajectory as of today. Getting into the space of maritime regulatory systems and the role of maritime states. So this is a picture which I wanted to bring into everyone's traction, is more or less to understand how each and every governing body plays their role in terms of getting the required rules in place to move the industry towards decarbonization. So whether it could be the role of IMO in itself, or UN, or what the other bodies like, okay, maybe what maritime states are actually doing, both on the flag state and the coastal state standpoint, and how the classification society in itself supporting IMO in terms of getting these regulations in place. So which is all a kind of a picture everyone should have in this time. So transparency is the key, which is lagging in this industry. If you wanted to decarbonize this complete industry, we need transparency, the end-to-end transparency. This is a need of an harbor. Still, data transparency is the biggest challenge to measure the current state of our maritime emissions. So this can be only addressed by bringing the required transparency. So revealing what the data dictates to every stakeholders is important. Currently, many stakeholders in this value chain heavily rely on high-level estimations, which means it has great inaccuracies in terms of what the current action measures are and what they are thinking the measures are. So even when you look at the centric stakeholders in the shipping value chain, like maybe ship owner or even like operators who actually collects the data. Still, there is a challenge in terms of inaccurate data being collected and without any continuity. There could be discontinuity coming up in this data. It's more of how the reporting structure looks. So in terms of this industry, the reporting structure is quite complex. Industry ends up in duplications of reporting. So if you look at any stakeholders in this value chain, everyone wanted their data in different reportings. So a ship staff ends up in reporting the same numbers in 4 different platforms, for example, reporting the same numbers, which will again end up in duplication and also gives a burden and pressure, which will again build up, ending up in an inaccurate data with data quality issues happening by the end of the day. So we all need a better system and transparency to navigate this digitalization. So digitalization is something which is the need of an hour, which is happening in our industry. It was a bit late when we look at 8 years back comparing the other industry, but right now I think it is in its own phase, and it's quite evident between all stakeholders how the digitalization is taking the driver's seat and driving our industry when it comes to decarbonization. So one of the classic example here, which you could see how the missing emissions are calculated on the greenhouse gas study. So calculating the power multiplied by the fuel oil consumption, specific fuel oil consumption factor multiplied by the emission factor, we could be easily able to calculate any emissions estimate of either it could be a main engine, auxiliary engine, or boiler. Then when you're going to multiply it with the duration of the voyage, then you're going to end up in finding out the total emission of that specific ship for that specific voyage. So this is on a high level in terms of how the estimations are working to calculate different pollutants. Of course, CO2 or anything, everything has a different emission factors. Depends upon the emission factors, we could able to exactly come up with the numbers, emission numbers. Of course, black carbon is different. That's something which is not covered up in this specific formula. So current market of carbon accounting tool can be segmented into 2 groups. One group has a complete visibility, collecting this data from ship owners, verifying it and certifying it with a statement of compliance. And on the other side, carriers, especially logistics providers, they still rely on high-level estimates. When I say high-level estimates, frameworks like GLEC or any other similar frameworks on the logistics side, depends upon the trade lane. Let's talk about a ship goes from Algeciras to maybe a sort of a transatlantic voyage. A ship reaches one of the port in US. So in this transatlantic voyage, so what could be the emissions? So that again depends upon the specific number defined. So this much is the grams of CO2 per ton nautical mile, which is a definition which you get from any of these frameworks. You multiply it with the actual voyage definitions in terms of distance and TU or deadweight carried, so that we can end up in calculating estimated CO2 emission for that specific TU or that specific voyage. So this is again, the methodology in itself is far away from the reality, and also there is a poor data quality and absence of consistency in terms of methodology each and every such framework follows, which is a sort of again misleading in terms of what was the actual emissions and what has actually been estimated, having a bigger gap, wider gap. So this can be easily bridged only when IMO or any governing body making these data transparent, but still there is a long way to go in terms of looking at this data in itself as a threat for the business. Last but not least, looking into the sustainability reports on shipping. So almost 60 plus organizations in the current shipping world are reporting these sustainability reports, which means they are disclosing all ESG aspects in terms of environmental and social and governance data set, declaring what has happened in the last 1 year. So if you open any classic sustainability report from shipping company, you could easily able to understand what was the scope on emissions, what are the other scope emissions. The only problem here is that they are not consistent. There is a complete and clear inconsistency. So there is no standardization or a framework to how these sustainability reports needs to be defined and written. So there is no guidelines. Of course, there are multiple bodies existing in this world, SABS or Norwegian fund. So all these organizations, again, including the sustainability goals from IMO, all these are having some defined strategies, frameworks, but in reality, it has not been implemented. So it's a need of an hour to come up with a proper guidance and framework when it comes to writing down these sustainability reports for the public. But one thing is clear and evident. We see our industry is moving in the right direction. Looking at all these disclosure reports, we are in a phase of getting the required transparency. So we can clearly see the industry will end up in a place where we could see zero carbon ships moving around us sooner or later. We all know IMO's commitment is 2050 for 50% and 70% reductions on the long term. But also we could see companies like Maersk coming up with their zero carbon shipping strategies by 2040, which is again taking a sort of a early mover steps, which is again motivating also motivating the other shipping companies to follow them. Greener comes at a price. I would like to end up with a note saying that greener comes at a price, saving fuel to reduce CO2 emission. And in long run, it will be again back to saving fuel to reduce USD. So looking at our industry from a decade back, it's all started. If a company and organization has a fuel saving initiative, that means it's a sort of a luxury, saying that it's a sort of additional benefit. If you try to operate your ship under us, then it's again an advantage, added advantage. Later stage, it moved to a phase where there is a need of an hour to improve the TCE, time charter equivalence. So when I say time charter equivalence, again, to improve the earning, you need to save fuel. Fuel is almost, if you take an MR tanker vessel, it's actually a 60% cost of TCE. So if you're going to reduce your fuel cost, you're going to improve the TCE, time charter equivalence. So that's the point where everyone is getting into the strategy of having a performance management team so that they can able to monitor and track and save fuel at the right time to improve the TCEs. In later stage, of course, we all own the responsibility of reducing the CO2 to save this planet or ocean. So as these regulations pitch in, now the tractions has changed in terms of save the fuel to reduce CO2 so that your ship can able to float on waters. We all know this classic ratings A, B, C, D, E in terms of CII. So if a ship gets a rating above C, then you might end up in a proper action plan. Of course, there are strict actions which might be coming up in the future from IMO standpoint, but so far it is evident no one wants to get into the rating of D and E, where you need to provide a proper action plan, how you want to move your vessel back to C, at least in the future. So we are running this race together. When we say we are all running this race together, so we need a regulatory transparency, and we also need to communicate the known paths and pathways. So many organizations like Maersk Zero Carbon Shipping Center, which is aiding a non-profit organization trying to aid and support in terms of what are the preferred pathways which the major ship owners and ship operators taking, so that the other smaller ship owners and the other parties can follow them. So I think in this ways, in this race, no one is a winner. There could be multiple winners. So by the end of the day, we all running this race to decarbonize the one common goal of reducing the fuel to save this planet. So let's all support this initiative. I think knowledge is the key. So knowledge is going to bring this transparency, and transparency will lead up ending up this industry towards the greener environment. So future aspects of bridging this gap of fossil fuel price and the future fuel price, again, when it's going to be scalable, the things are going to change. and bringing up this futuristic emission trading schemes, again going to aid and supporting this green corridors and also support these early movers in terms of decarbonization. Either it could be building methanol fuel ships, even though you might not see how the strategy is in terms of getting this fuel in place in future. Of course, I think the industry right now in a phase of building up these vessels with the dual fuel aspects, but when a concrete action has been taken from this transition phase to the future fuel standpoint, I think the industry will start following the same. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you. And I open up this floor for a Q&A. Floor is open for Q&A. Just to make sure I'm still connected. So am I audible again?
You're audible.
No questions? That means either this presentation could be interesting, everything is understandable, or you didn't understand anything. Of course, I know it's a bit of a sandwich in terms of getting all the aspects going around decarbonization at one specific session, but hopefully you can get back and try to understand in detail in terms of what we have discussed today.
There is one question I would like to ask from you.
Yes, Mr. Yogesh, please go ahead.
In the industry standards, when there is a system of pre-purchase inspection for a vessel that is already existing, so we have something called INDAL standard. I hope you know about that.
Yeah.
That there is one standard called INDAL standard in which we have a system, we have a checklist, we have our fields in which we see a vessel before pre-purchasing. Now that your vessels are, some of them are not compliant, some of them are not meeting, there are talks going around of slow streaming the vessels, putting a governor to the main fleet vessels to reduce their speed. Where does the industry do this kind of feedback of these kind of statutory requirements for green shippings into the actual scenario in which the vessel is ready to be taken over or vessel is ready to be purchased? So where does that link come? Because okay, you say okay, this, let us say what vessel you told, bulk carrier. This bulk carrier is not meeting that kind of requirement. It is having an issue as far as emission is concerned. The CI is not meeting. So when a ship owner is going to buy a vessel or take over, what does he do to ensure that he has another, let us say, 5 to 7 years of productive commercial life?
Thank you for this question. I think this is quite a valid question, and it also opens up a space for me to touch up a bit in terms of the existing old tonnages, what exactly is happening, right? So we all heard of EEXI. Again, that is the existing ships. It's a so-called EEDI. It's the same thing for the existing ships. So which gives a bit of a reassurance in terms of preparing the vessels technically fit to align to the IMO targets. So unless a ship is technically fit, that we can't be able to operationally achieve the CII. So that is the place where any vessel in this world today we see it's not complying as per EEXI targets. So vessel needs to go through all this reduction aspects. So when I say reduction aspect, this is all like a sort of technical reduction aspect. So it's not about like operationally I'll reduce the speed, but there is a mandatory requirement in terms of, let's talk about engine power limitation. So it could be a hard limitation or a soft limitation. So you talked about governor, for example, to have this limitations, right? But everything is actually governed and managed in terms of what exactly the measure we are taking, both in terms of hard and soft limitation, which is again approved by IMO. It could be Shapoli or it could be anything for that matter when it comes to engine power limitation. So everything is again guided and navigated, and this certification you're gonna get it from the classification society in terms of this vessel is fit after the EPL. So this vessel can actually comply with the required EEXI number for that ship type and size. So if as a person, if you're gonna want to buy a new vessel, existing vessel, so you're simply gonna see what is the EEXI of the vessel, right? So anyway, by the end of the day, I think in this year, as it's gonna reach that sort of a survey period for that specific vessel, the next survey date, that time the vessel should get complied with the EEXI targets. So there won't be any vessel which is again part of EEXI will be a non-compliant ship in reality on the technical standpoint. On operational standpoint, it can be depends upon how the vessels are operated, but that is again how much efficient a ship operator is actually operating the vessel is the topic of question. So there is all loopholes right now in terms of okay, I also seen classic examples saying that a ship is just doing a sort of a spiral rounds on one specific region, and I could see a sort of a comment in terms of saying that, hey, they are doing that just to get a better CII rating. Maybe they are doing a ballast voyages, a lot of ballast voyages, just circle and circle, get a better rating. But that is not a healthy discussion to say. It's more of, we know there are loopholes in terms of not including the actual cargo quantity into the CII logic with some valid reasons to it, not having the data in itself in IMO DCS. So there is known gaps in the systems, but I think most of the existing technical gaps are already being covered, and we are making sure the vessels are actually falling and getting the actual required EEXI numbers. Hope that answers.
Okay, makes some sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes, it will be great if you can tell your name and start.
I'm Atul. I'm a second year student in this department. Sir, in the present era, I think leadership is everything. So we are now seeing that so many companies and individuals are coming out, and they are wanting to lead these changes. So my question is, in your opinion, what will be the I think in your opinion, what are the what kind of leadership is needed for galvanizing this change? That's the question.
Thank you for asking a bit of a broader question, but again, as I mentioned, it's again quite relevant. So to have a proper change or the relevant change required for the industry in terms of driving this industry by any organization, we don't need a traditional leadership style. We need a flexible leadership style in terms of listening to any sort of innovative ideas or welcoming any sort of innovative ideas which anyone can come up in the industry. That's why if you look at any organization right now, they are coming up with innovation working group, or they are coming up with emission working group to see what sort of ideas an organization can generate and bring up to support their own decarbonization strategies. It's not about just following what are the existing known strategies in the industry, but it's also to reinvent or find new aspects how we can actually get into the zero carbon shipping world. So when you talk about leadership, I think leadership quality is the key is being transparent and open and listen to whatever idea it could be. None of the ideas are again old-fashioned or irrelevant. So in this world, we need such leaders who can actually listen and try to navigate this decarbonization of this industry in the right way. Thank you for asking again.
Sir,
Yes, Adi.
I'm audible, sir.
Yeah, you are. Please go ahead.
My name is Satyan, and I'm the second year student of this department. And my question is, as we are concerned about the decarbonization and its necessity, and also we are actively looking to achieve it in the nearby future, what are the main challenges to achieve this zero carbon target? Also, what are the solutions that have got your attention?
Yeah, good question. So I think the major challenge right now is we all have fancy ideas, we have fancy technologies to decarbonize, but there is no easiest way to measure in reality what that specific action has actually in the end result that value what it has made. So when I say let's talk about one specific technical aspect, let's say a ship is fitted with one of the energy saving devices. Let's say it could be a simple PPCF. So there is a challenge in terms of exactly measuring what sort of reduction it has brought up in reality, because we all come up with these fancy numbers in terms of reductions, looking at a calm sea aspect, but in real world, how the ships are operated, looking at this actual sea conditions, it's very hard to track. I think a proper measurement, building a proper measurement tools in terms of proving this business cases is a sort of a need of an hour, which will also help everyone to have that built up that trust in terms of these technologies and try to take the same course. So when I say on the technical side, also on the operational side, we all hear about voyage optimization. So that again adds up in terms of route optimization into it. Maybe taking the best route in terms of, it might not be on the distance, maybe it might be on in terms of taking the best route in terms of less fuel consumption. Maybe due to weather, maybe the vessel is diverted to a different route. It could be slightly long, but it has a lower consumption possibilities. But proving all this with the proper post assessment is quite important. These tools are actually sort of picking up, but still the trust factor is missing. There is no proper methodologies and sort of tools, which is true tools, which is actually navigating these transparency, which is required for the industry to rely on. Hope that answers. Do you want me to add anything more?
No, sir. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Devika KB. I'm a second year student of the department. So my question is, what do you think are the practical challenges that we face in implementing this transition from fossil fuels to alternative fuels?
Thank you. So transition from fossil fuel to alternate fuel, again, the industry is not ready. So supply and demand, right? Even though we're going to get into a sort of building up all these methanol ships, fancy methanol ships or ammonia powered ships, but where is the supply? In reality, that is the biggest question mark what we have. But as the industry moves on, when there is the supply which is going to be fulfilled, so that is a sort of a readiness which the industry in itself should come upon in terms of motivating and supporting the organization, which is actually aiding this growth of future fuels, maybe methanol for that sake. There is clear evidence and examples which I can quote here is like, for example, when Maersk decided to build up methanol vessels, they also made sure that how they can fulfill the demand, right? How they can get the actual supply. So they also invested in organizations and companies which actually produce, finding ways to produce methanol in reality. So So bridging this gap of supply and demand when it comes to fossil fuel, that's gonna be a sort of a key driver for the industry to choose the right first available fuel for that sake. And safety is again a topmost priority when we all talk about future fuel, but again, when it comes to safety side, there could be fuels which are not safer, or there is no proper regulations in place in terms of using those future fuel within the industry. So people do see as a sort of a caution or a challenge in terms of taking that decisions right away. It could be ammonia, or it could be any other ships for that matter, any other fuel for that matter. Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Mohammed Rasif, and I'm currently studying 4th year department. Actually, in the presentation, you have told about that every stakeholders required different format of the data, right? So what's stopping us from creating a universal data format, just like JSON or PDF, for example? And another one being that for the IMO DCS, is there any way that a student can access the data from the IMO DCS, keeping the anonymity of the data? Because I have tried to get the data from the UMRV, but I have failed in getting the data from my IMO DCS. So is there any way to get that? Thank you.
Okay, so first part of your question, I think that's a great question to be debated here. And there are two challenges tied up with having this common platform and making this data transparent to all the stakeholders. So let's take a classic example of a ship is being operated on a long-term TC. So which means ship owner collects this data for IMO DCS purpose and also for his own maintenance and auditing purpose, right? And a charterer collects this data because he is paying for the fuel, and he also want to understand how much fuel has been consumed. And at the same time, he also wanted to track what the owner has promised in terms of speed and consumption. So when the charterer hires a ship, he gets a sort of a charter party from a ship owner saying that my vessel will consume X amount of ton of fuel for the specific speed. If the actual reported data shows higher consumption than the promised, then he can put up a TC claim. So both on the consumption and speed standpoint. So this data actually again becomes more sensitive. And the problem here is there is no system right now in terms of having a universal system on board a ship, which can actually circulate this data to whichever parties they are relevant fields which they want. Traditionally, there is a challenge from ship owner in itself, because nobody wants to allow their data to be exposed everywhere. Of course, charterer might get visibility saying that, okay, charterer needs this data, so they're going to have their own platform installed on board a ship, or they might send a Excel form and saying that you fill the data which I need in terms of what is the actual consumption and operational aspects of the ship. So here you end up with a duplication. So these all happens just because transparency is missing. And this transparency going to come up only when industry understands the transparency is actually required. It's not a threat anymore. So right now, if you look at any data, you might ask a classic question again on top of it, saying that, okay, we all speak about CII and IMO DCS, cargo quantity has not been included, this specific data point. Of course, there is again a lot of reasons to it. By the end of the day, it is also sensitive data in itself. Looking at the commercial standpoint. So these data, in reality, nobody wanted to expose. So similarly, for example, today we spoke about CII or Poseidon principle of marine insurers for banks and marine insurers, all these aspects. So each and every party, again, they are collecting this data back from the vessel or from ships. So they might end up in duplication again. So it is all end up in a root problem of saying that transparency is missing. There is no one system which the industry aids, and again it can impact the commercialization, because in one ship there you might see multiple systems installed in terms of getting that reported numbers. So future solution could be having, as you mentioned, a standardized reporting system on board a ship, which many companies are coming up. That is also a sort of a key sales pitch I could see on many startups which is coming these days. So I think industry will accept it or not. It's again a question mark. And I don't want to demotivate here, but there is a long way to go in terms of industry accepting a common system from where with an API you can circulate this data to whichever parties required it. So that is currently missing. And just to answer your second part of your question in terms of having the IMO DCS data publicly available, of course, you know the answer. It's not publicly available so far, and it's not even been anonymized and made available for public. I also heard from IMO saying that there was a resolution or a discussion in terms of making this data anonymized and making it available publicly to the wider audience. But I think there is a denial from the committee. So yeah, so you can't have this IMO DCS data publicly available on the voyage level or in the ship level. But as I showed in my presentation, you might have already seen this annual disclosure reports from IMO DCS in itself showcase some high level numbers, not only the one which I'm showing, even it exposes some detailed information like how many numbers of ship actually reported, how many numbers of ship actually supposed to report, all this detailed information, which with your expertise still able to drill down to further levels. So you might see a bulk carrier between like 10,000 to 20,000 dead weight. This is the fuel reported on IMO DCS. So those aspects which you can actually try to drill down further to ship level if required at your end. Hope this answers.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Any last questions?
I think we have come to the end of the Q&A session. For further queries, you may directly contact Mr. Jarvis Johnson. Before we come to the end, we would like to present a token of gratitude to Mr. Jarvis Johnson for delivering this wonderful talk.
Sorry, before getting into that, let me also try to share my contacts with the wider audience. In case if you guys have any further clarifications or guidance or any future discussions which you would like to have, please feel free to do so. You could see my contact details on the screen right now. And once again, thank you for listening, and back to you. Let me stop sharing my screen. Thank you. Thank you for this token of gratitude again. And I feel privileged in terms of talking about decarbonization among this future navigators in terms of driving this industry to zero carbon shipping. So thank you so much again.
I hope you all have enjoyed the seminar. On behalf of SNAS and Department of Ship Technology, I would like to express our gratitude to Mr. Jarvis Johnson for delivering such a wonderful presentation. My heartfelt thanks to our Honorable HOD Dr. Satish Babu PK and the faculty members for their valuable contribution, guidance, and engagement in all our efforts. We owe our special thanks to all the members of Dostas for their exceptional commitment to the department. Last but not the least, I thank the students for your humble cooperation for making this event a success. And feel free to contact us for feedback. It is appreciated. Now I request everyone to have a look at the chat box and please fill up the feedback form provided there. Once again, I thank you all for your attention, and we have come to the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.